things could look pretty adverse for LSU potentially here in the future. Now, I'll lay out exactly what we know right now. LSU's received a notice of allegations. It outlines major violations allegedly committed in its men's basketball program under Will Wade. It is also folded in, remember, the LSU football situation with Odell handing money to players at the national championship and JP Funes paying a player's dad for a no-show job to the tune of like $180,000. Things that we have talked about plenty in the past, right? Well, the IARP, which is the NCAA's independent accountability review process, gotta love some good alphabetic bureaucracy. The IARP is a notoriously slow system that has been oft criticized, but it does, I guess, arrive at the point at the end. They did just rule against NC State not too long ago. But I will say this, although notice of allegations just came in, this process is still going to be drawn out. LSU has several weeks to respond to that notice of allegations. Then the IARP has weeks to respond to the response, and then a hearing will eventually be set. And one of the key details in all this is that Will Wade's contract was amended in 2019 to say that he could, not would, but he could be fired with cause if it is proven that any major violations were committed. And so that is obviously kind of where this conversation starts. Like, what does fate hold for Will Wade? And how does, look, I support the general because I've never been, from day one, Jake, I've never been morally or ethically outraged with any of this, right? Like I've always, and I'm not naive. Like I'm not sitting here saying that these allegations maybe didn't happen. What I'm saying is you're going to have to show me like photographic evidence of him like with the body caught red-handed for me to care, or not even to care, but for me to accept it. Because I do think it's prevalent. I think it's been prevalent for years in college basketball. And I think now in the age of NIL, all of this seems especially absurd and out there. So I still support the general no matter what. I guess the question is, how does Scott Woodward feel about him?
Yeah, I mean, look, this has been a story that it's been going on so long. I covered it when I was doing radio in Shreveport only. I covered it when it was hanging with Hester. I covered it when it was hanging with Hester and Haney. And I'm covering it here on OTB. I mean, it has lasted 4 shows for your boy here. I mean, it has been going on for a long time. Like, there's not going to be any new information. Like, this is for Pete Thamel and Pat Forty to continue to write the same article around the same time of the year. Like, it is, you can book it. Like, if the 1st of March is coming, one of those two guys or both of them is going to write the same article over the last 5 years.
Well, so it's interesting because, look, I absolutely think that Thamel and Forty have an axe to grind. I think even if they are approaching it as objectively they want to in their brain, they've probably heard too much crap from like LSU fans on their Twitter. Like they've had too many things said to them where, they got a little skin in the game, if you will. That said, I don't know that while this update contains nothing urgent or breaking, like, okay, take their actual articles out of it. The notice of allegations is still potentially a major deal, simply because if the IARP has proof, like beyond a shadow of a doubt proof that LSU cannot lawyer against or argue against, or maybe, if Woodward doesn't want to, if they have proof that they have major allegations, then, I mean, I mean, what do you think? Like, it's tough to see LSU going the Auburn Bruce Pearl route. I just don't know that the administration wants to protect Wade in maybe the same way. And to be honest, the Auburn situation is so crazy with interim presidents and ADs and everything that, like, maybe that was a contributing factor to Pearl responding. I don't know. Look, I look at a campus right now, Jake, and I see an AD that has replaced, every major coach, save for basketball, with his own, right? We got Brian Kelly now in football. You got Jay Johnson in baseball. Kim Mulkey taking over the women's basketball program. I mean, Beth Torina's softball, I think, would be considered maybe the next most major sport that has not been changed. And so we just look at Scott's track record. It certainly feels like he would maybe want his guy in there. And if he does reach that conclusion and he wants his own guy, fresh start, kind of free from the cloud, then the IARP could potentially be handing him that on a silver platter.
A couple of things. One, I keep thinking you're saying AARP.
I know.
And it's throwing me off a little bit. I'm trying to think, what are we talking about here?
You're getting old. I'm telling you something.
I keep getting those in the mail.
Yeah.
The second part of this is, I understand what you're saying about Scott, but Scott has had chances to probably move on if he wanted to.
Yep.
I think you can look back and see in 2019 what they did with the contract. I mean, like, there's probably information that he knows, and he would have had the opportunity and probably would have had, somewhat calls if he wanted to move on from Will Wade. And so that, if you're an LSU fan, you can say, well, I mean, he saw everything that was laid out. They made a couple of changes to his contract, and he's still the head basketball coach at LSU.
And I want to say those changes were made under, I don't want to say they were made under Oliva. So it was not Woodward in that process kind of deciding what the changes would be exactly. So we can infer that, like, oh, well, he changed it to make it easier to fire him. So that's probably what he wants to do. They were made under Oliva. So that's a good point by you. And look, maybe you look to Bruce Pearl as a reason to maybe kind of stay the course, weather the storm, and look how it plays out. One of the other interesting, so again, I am interested to see how Woodward feels about it, how this plays out, because I think there is potential for actual, some big news there. But one other interesting thing, Jake, to me is like, what is the court of public opinion going to say about this?
Yeah.
Because I just don't know that people are going to give a damn. Like, are people really going to be up in arms about players getting money when football players, not even basketball players, football players now are getting like $200,000 a year, $150,000 a year? And this is good. I'm not saying that like it's negative. This is a good thing.
I mean, you got some that are seven figures.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, not a huge number.
So, I mean, how weird is it then to sit there and finger wag and prosecute based on alleged payment deals of the past? If anything, it feels like those deals should have always been made, and the NCAA has just been artificially capping things for and stopping these players from getting their value, including me and you, right? And a lot of former athletes, like, for years and years. So yeah. I think the NCAA definitely has an axe to grind with Will Wade. I think the timing of all of this coming out right before March Madness is, I do not think that's by coincidence. From what I've heard, LSU was like, somebody's definitely right in line with 40 and Thamel leaking this stuff immediately, because the articles were up before LSU even really knew, or right at the time that they knew. So there's a lot of forces that are trying to bring down Will Wade. We've always heard that he doesn't have many friends in the conference in terms of his peers and whatnot. And I'm going to be very intrigued to see if he can stand against that, or will they get him for something that really nobody cares about and looks terribly hypocritical at the time, but technically was against the rules.
Yeah, and I know the rules were the rules when they were in place and people, weren't getting NIL deals or whatever. But I wonder how much that does change the penalty. Like, if it was like a number that came out and you're sitting there and you're thinking, like you're talking about, T, it's like, wait a minute, like that guy, like the third tight end on Georgia made $50,000 on an NIL deal, right? Damn. You know what I'm saying? So it's going to be like those type of conversations. Like, man, you're going to get them and, sanctions, and coaches are going to get fired over that. Like, right, wrong, or indifferent, like that's a conversation that's going to be had as well. So, I mean, this is going back so many years. I mean, you're talking about 5 years that you're trying to go back and figure this thing out. So, NIL deals kind of, I think people already like felt like, okay, well, like paying players a certain amount, whatever. But now NIL deals, when you've got people literally walking around making way more money than anybody else out there outside of professional athletes.
Yeah, it's again, it doesn't change the legality of when the allegation, the alleged infractions took place, but it definitely changes the context through which we view them. And I feel like it's going to feel very weird and hypocritical if they do go hard. But we'll see. We'll see. Maybe LSU agrees. Maybe they still don't have any concrete proof, right? This will come out in time. All right, coming up next here on OTB, talk a little Alvin Kamara, as there was some news there yesterday. No Ingram, big problem for the New Orleans Pelicans, and a little CD Deuce and Tyrann Mathieu. Keep it locked here on Off the Bench.